There's this fascinating use of detective stories, really kind of sub-literary genre at the time that seems to be running through a lot of Borges's work.
I think that's right. Death in the Compass is one of the stories in Fictionis that is very heavily based on a detective story. He sets up the reader, I think, in a way that makes you think that the detective is looking for clues and then is led to a trap in the end. So he's not quite writing detective stories. He's not writing genre fiction.
Although it is amusing. He was first published in the United States in translation in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. It was precisely Death in the Compass, was presented as though it was a detective story.
Right. Well, I suppose it is a meta-detective story that is as good as a regular detective story. It's true. And it's interesting that he doesn't shy away from genre that some might consider not quite literary enough.
And of course, he's interested also in tango and kind of Argentine popular culture. So this is this kind of move, I think, to cross certain boundaries literarily as well as geographically.
Yeah.
In this respect, I suppose he's almost the opposite of Lu Xun. If Lu Xun, his answer to this sort of crisis of China is to figure out how to become Chinese, Borges seems to want to become universal.
Right. And that certainly goes along with the world made out of libraries, international books in this infinite library. There are books in all possible languages and all possible combinations. So the library itself is not located anywhere. It's itself a universe composed of books. And
so instead of the best of all possible worlds, it's the book of all possible worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think there is something universal, and that probably is part of his universal success. He becomes much more famous abroad than at home. It's more of a world literature phenomenon than a local phenomenon. And I think that's in part because from the beginning he grows up in this world of translation, of international literature. He absorbs it into his own fiction. So there is something really universal about him. The question is whether that's all there is.
Well, I tend to see also the local as being very important for Borges. But to pick up for a moment further on the universal, it's almost like, in comparison, say, to our friend Camões, who is really the first writer to live in the world. I mean, Borges, more than anyone practically, lives in the world's books.
Right.
So he's really reviewing and reading, as they come out, new works by the Japanese modernist Akutagawa, Virginia Woolf's latest novels. He's reviewing, he's translating some of those, and the more sort of radical ones like Orlando. He's very interested in what's happening at this moment around the world, the whole new kind of network that certainly is part of the universalism that's there.
And the availability, there's a world market in literature, and that makes these works
and things like Sur. I was looking at one of the issues of the second volume of this magazine, Sur, from about 1940, and they already have an ad in the back for Books Abroad, which was the American publication that is now called World Literature Today. So they're in a network of marketing, advertising, and they are actually the abroad for the Books Abroad. But now Books Abroad is the abroad source that they are advertising in these very issues in which Borges is on the editorial board. But at the same time, I think it's extremely Argentine. First, he started out, you could say, schizophrenically, and we'll come back with Orhan Pamuk, I think, also. So he starts out not able to decide, does he want to be more French than the French, or does he want to be the best Argentine writer, the best provincial Buenos Aires writer? And his early works are kind of naturalistic, realistic works set in the suburbs of Buenos Aires, using a lot of local language, talking about tangos and all these things. And then he starts to write these much more universal fictions. But he has a wonderful essay called The Argentine Writer in Tradition from 1951, in which he says that he used to think he had to have all this local color. But then he started writing these more elaborate, more universalized fictions, and his friends told him finally he'd actually captured the feeling of Buenos Aires.
I think Death in the Compass is one example which takes place in this weird place sort of in the suburbs, but it's kind of a surreal setting, but at the same time, I think he himself felt that finally managed to capture something local, the way his sort of more official local color fiction didn't.
That's right. He's an uncanny character politically because he's hard to identify with any one side. He was anti-communist, he was anti-fascist, and he's very anti-nationalist. So he wants to be a great Argentine writer, but not a nationalistic writer. And in this essay, in 51, it's after Juan Perón has come into power and is sort of promoting a kind of populism that's really a mask for a very repressive regime. And Borges has a wonderful line in this essay in which he says that the cult of local color is a foreign import the true nationalists should reject. So he's really
trying to out-nationalize, so there's a true nationalism.
There's a much deeper level, which shows a common humanity. He ends that essay by saying, I believe that as an Argentine, the whole world is my patrimony. And he more or less says he can see the world, and particularly the European world, whole in a way that if you're stuck in the middle of Europe, you won't.
I wonder whether that's quite similar again to Lu Xun, who is not a communist. He lives abroad. He tries to figure out what modern Chinese literature might be, but not in a narrow nationalistic manner.
I think going back to Camões, you become Portuguese by becoming global.
Right.
That's very much the theme there. And he has a kind of ambiguous relationship towards the imperial enterprise that he's partly celebrating and partly questioning.
Yeah.
And I think also we'll see with Pamuk or with Salman Rushdie quite similar. They're interested in global processes. They're very much become identified as sort of great national writers, but they're not really part of a nationalistic enterprise in any way.
Right.